Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Rooted Digging In. My name is Daniel Norton. I'm the Senior Technical and R&D Manager for Horticulture here at Profile Products. And today I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking with you about algae mitigation, the fun green stuff. And so this is an image that we shot at a grower who's doing direct stick mums. And many of you are in the heat of mum season, and a lot of growers are starting to do more and more direct stick programs with mums and poinsettias. So this may be a common sight at your facility. And so we want to talk about some of these issues. And number one, surface algae can be a complete nuisance. Number one is a breeding ground for unwanted pests, fungus gnats in particular. Fungus gnats, the larvae feed on organic material within the substrates, and when you have very moist, wet conditions, and you have a layer of surface algae on the pots, this can help accelerate the problems. The other thing is it creates a biofilm on the surface of the substrate, which can help trap moisture. It can also help limit water movement into the substrate. And I've actually seen this happen with crops and young plant mixes, where you get a very thick layer of surface algae. When those plants get moved out of propagation, where they are in very wet and humid environments, and they start drying out, well, the algae starts drying out because it's not wet enough to sustain it. And what will happen is a crust will form, which is essentially dead algae. And it can be very difficult to get water to penetrate that surface. It also feeds off of the nutrients, particularly nitrogen, that are being fed to the plants. So you have less efficiency of your fertilizer. This can lead to stalled plant growth. And then lastly, if you're overwatering the plants and keeping them too wet, well, this can also cause human safety issues, because now you're creating wet concrete, wet gravel, which can be slip hazards for your employees. So let's just look at a couple more examples of things that we've seen in the field. So not just direct stick programs, but also young plant programs. These are some asters and Delosperma cuttings. We can see that just the shininess on the surface of the aster cuttings, where there's algae formation. It has a very green sheen to it. And then here's another angle of some chrysanthemums, and you can particularly see on the right-hand side the nice green surface layer of algae that we don't like to see. And, you know, regardless of what types of potting soil you're using, surface algae is a problem, whether you're using mixes that contain hydrofiber or whether you're using conventional mixes. We actually did a preliminary study a couple of years ago with Auburn University, where we looked at peat light mixes versus peat hydrofiber mixes under constant mist programs, and we had no significant difference with regards to the amount of algae formation. So it's not that you know, hydrofiber mixes or peat perlite mixes or any other mixes really makes a difference in terms of the amount of surface algae that forms. It's really an inherent problem to mixes in general. And it also really doesn't seem to matter what kind of crops that you're growing. Again, what it boils down to is how much water you're putting out, and particularly in the case of direct stick programs, where you have a lot of surface area of the pot exposed while you're trying to get roots on those plants, you have a lot of area that can lead to algae development because sunlight is reaching it. Now, as the plant canopy gets larger, typically that's going to shade out the algae, and then it will diminish. So really, in direct stick programs in particular, it's very critical that you have really good moisture management early on, that you're giving the cutting just enough without overwetting and overwatering it. Now, in the case of these products, which are not direct stick that we're seeing on here, these are really plugs or liners that were transplanted into a finished container. This is really mostly an example of just too much water being applied during production. So let's talk about some keys to success. Well, irrigation is key, no matter what substrate type that you're using. So first, that starts with the initial moisture that you start with off of your mix line. There's some other resources that the hydrofiber team has put out there for helping to manage moisture content starting out off your mix line. One of those tests that we highly recommend is called a squeeze test. And so if your mixes are too wet coming out of your mix line, that's not only going to cause or be setting you up for surface algae problems, but also is going to hurt you when you're going to fill trays and containers. It's important that you reduce your mist frequency and pulse time. Now, again, you have to be careful if you're misting in propagation, because again, when those cuttings do not have roots on them, it's important that you keep the leaves wet, that you so that they don't start flagging and wilting, because then you're going to have lack of uniformity with your rooting, and that can be a completely different challenge altogether. You want to make sure that you have a good air exchange with the substrate. It's important to keep your irrigation lines as well as your mist nozzles, because biofilms will accumulate in the irrigation lines as well as the mist nozzles, and they can be a source of contamination. It's important to regularly and routinely clean your facility, particularly under benches, and especially areas like propagation houses or areas where you're doing direct stick production. Something else that we have seen is, this is some research that came out of Dr. Jim Faust at Clemson University, was that iron seems to contribute to algae formation. They found that higher concentrations of algae led to more algae growth. Now, plants need iron just like algae does, so you can't restrict plants from having iron. However, if you find that maybe your water source is high in iron, or maybe you're just overfeeding with iron to begin with, that could be another way to mitigate algae growth. And then there's also some chemical controls. Some signs to look out for when you're in the greenhouse. Number one, water pooling on the soil surface, which means that you're really keeping your plants too wet. A shiny look to the soil. And in this image, we can see that on the tray that there is a very slick, slimy looking surface to it that's usually very indicative of algae. Fungus gnat activity, so you're seeing a lot of fungus gnats collected on sticky cards, or if you pick up plants and then there's a swarm of fungus gnats, there's usually a pretty good indication that your greenhouse in that section is staying too wet. And then also excess moisture on the leaf. This is I talked about this previous on the slide, so this is from Dr. Jim Faust and Laura Signoretti from Clemson University. This was done, I believe, in 2012. And here's the control water with no iron. And then we have various concentrations of iron. And basically, at 5 parts per million, you see that there's a lot of algae in the water. And then as you get to 0.3 parts per million, you can see that the algae levels drop way off. Now, the point here is, again, if you are over zealous with your iron, then that potentially can exacerbate your problems. So just something to keep in mind. So initial moisture is key. And so for most soil blends, we highly recommend with hydrofiber in the mix, for a peat hydrofiber mix, aiming for a 60 to 65% moisture content. And if you're doing the squeeze test, the way to check this is by making a ball of soil with your fist, releasing it, and that ball of soil should not hold a tight clump. If it holds a tight clump, you're too wet. Manage excess moisture. So basically you want to reduce your mist frequency and pulse times. Also, you want to make sure that you do not have any, you basically want water to the point of runoff off the leaves. Start clean, end clean. Keep floors clean and free of plant debris and algae growth. If you have a lot of water, make sure you do routine cleaning. And also, it's important to clean your irrigation lines often, as well as your mist nozzles. Manage your excess iron. I know some growers struggle with high iron in their water, but there's also some growers that are just overfeeding with iron to begin with. So just, again, just something to take a look at. So excess iron plus sunlight, you're definitely going to get more algae growth. And lastly, chemical controls. Our customers, you know, talk to us about, they've had a lot of success with both Xeritol and Clean Grow. There's other products that are widely available out there. Again, a lot of our customers, though, in particular, really like Clean Grow. They really like it as a preventative product. They say that, you know, as long as you are proactive in treating for algae, it does an excellent job in mitigating it. However, it does not work as well as some other chemical products, excuse me, if you already have an algae problem. So you may want to look at something different there. And that's it for algae mitigation for today. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at hydrofiber.com or contact a hydrofiber expert today. And thank you very much, and hope everyone has a great rest of the week.